It's that time again. It's time to continue Dystopia December with part 3 of Brave New World, beginning again with chapter 8. Outside in the dust and among the garbage, there are 4 dogs now. Oh, Bees with number 1 today. Morning, Bees. Morning. It's barely morning. Beelzebub. Bees. Tweez. Beelzebub. Did I spell that right? You spelled that right? Yeah, Beelzebub. Yes, good morning. Thanks for joining me. I'm doing all right. This is the first day I'm operating on a schedule. I'm not a fan of it anymore. But here we go. Outside, in the dust and among the garbage, there were 4 dogs now. Bernard and John were walking slowly up and down. So hard for me to realize, Bernard was saying, to reconstruct as though we were living on different planets, in different centuries. A mother and all this dirt, gods, and old age and disease. He shook his head. It's almost inconceivable. I shall never understand unless you explain. Explain what? This, he indicated the pueblo, that, and it was the little house outside the village. Everything, all your life. But what is there to say? From the beginning, as far back as you can remember. As far back as I can remember. John frowned. There was a long silence. It was very hot. They had eaten a lot of tortillas and sweet corn. Linda said, "Come lie down, baby." They lay down together in the big bed. "Sing," and Linda sang Streptocock G to Banbury T, and bye baby Banting. Soon you'll need decanting. Her voice got fainter and fainter. There was a loud noise, and he woke with a start. A man was saying something to Linda, and Linda was laughing. She had pulled the blanket up to her chin, but the man pulled it down again. His hair was like 2 black ropes, and round his arm was a lovely silver bracelet with blue stones in it. He liked the bracelet, but all the same, he was frightened. He hid his face against Linda's body. Linda put her hand on him, and he felt safer. In those other words he did not understand so well, she said to the man, "Not with John here." The man looked at him, and then again at Linda, and said a few words in a soft voice. Linda said no, but the man bent over the bed towards him, and his face was huge, terrible. The black ropes of his hair touched the blanket. "No," Linda said again, and he felt her hands squeezing him more tightly. "No, no." But the man took hold of one of his arms, and it hurt. He screamed. The man put up his other hand and lifted him up. Linda was still holding him, still saying no, no. The man said something short and angry, and suddenly her hands were gone. "Linda, Linda." He kicked and wriggled, but the man carried him across to the door, opened it, put him down on the floor in the middle of the other room, and went away, shutting the door behind him. Excuse me a second, I gotta blow. Okay, back to it. I leave off the man. It's something short and angry. He got up and ran to the door. Standing on tiptoe, he could just reach the big wooden latch. He lifted it and pushed, but the door wouldn't open. "Linda?" he shouted, but she didn't answer. He remembered a huge room, rather dark, and there were big wooden things with strings fastened to them, and lots of women standing round them, making blankets. Linda said. Linda told him to sit in the corner with the other children while she went and helped the women. He played with the little boys for a long time. Suddenly people started talking very loud, and there were the women pushing Linda away, and Linda was crying. She went to the door, and he ran after her. He asked her why they were angry. "Because I broke something," she said, and then she got angry too. "How should I know how to do their beastly weaving?" she said. "Beastly savages." He asked her what savages were. When they got back to their house, Pope was waiting at the door, and he came in with them. He had a big gourd full of stuff that looked like water, only it wasn't water. It's something with a bad smell that burnt your mouth and made you cough. Linda drank some, and Pope drank some. And then Linda laughed a lot and talked very loud. Then she and Pope went into the other room. When Pope went away, he went into the room. Linda was in bed, so fast asleep that he couldn't wake her. Pope used to come often. He used that stuff in the gourd He said the stuff in the gourd was called mescal, but Linda said it ought to be called soma, only it made you feel ill afterwards. He hated Pope. He hated them all the men who came to see Linda. One afternoon, when he had been playing with the other children, it was cold, he remembered, and there was snow on the mountains. He came back to the house and heard angry voices in the bedroom. They were women's voices, and they said words he didn't understand, but he knew they were dreadful words. Then suddenly, crash, something was upset. He heard people moving about quickly, and there was another crash, and then a noise like hitting a mule, only not so bony. Then Linda screamed. "Oh, don't, she said. He ran in. There were 3 women in dark blankets. Linda was on the bed. One of the women was holding her wrists. Another was lying across her legs, so that she couldn't kick. The third was hitting her with a whip. Once, twice, 3 times, and each time Linda screamed. Crying, he tugged at the fringe of the woman's blanket. "Please, please!" With her free hand, she had held him away. The whip came down again, and again Linda screamed. He caught hold of the woman's enormous brown hand between his and bit it with all his might. She cried out, wrenched her hand free, and gave him such a push that he fell down. While he was lying on the ground, she hit him 3 times with the whip. It hurt more than anything he had ever felt, like fire. The whip whistled again, fell. This time it was Linda who screamed. "But why did they want to hurt you, Linda?" he asked that night. He was crying, because the red marks of the whip on his back still hurt so terribly. But he was also crying because people were so beastly and unfair, and because he was only a little boy and couldn't do anything against them. Linda was crying too. She was grown up, but she wasn't big enough to fight against 3 of them. It wasn't fair for her either. "Why did they want to hurt you, Linda?" "I don't know. How should I know?" It was difficult to hear what she said, because she was lying on her stomach, and her face was in the pillow. "They say these men are their men," she went on. She did not seem to be talking to him at all. She seemed to be talking with other children. No. Shh. What? This keeps happening to me. Why does the page keep changing? Talking to them. And she did not seem to be talking to him at all. She seemed to be talking with someone inside herself. A long talk which she didn't understand. And in the end she started crying louder than ever. "Oh, don't cry, Linda, don't cry." He pressed himself against her. He put his arm around her neck. Linda cried out, "Oh, be careful, my shoulder, oh!" And she pushed him away, hard. His head banged against the wall. Little idiot, she shouted. And then suddenly she began to slap him. Slap, slap. Linda, he cried. Oh, Mother, don't. I'm not your mother. I won't be your mother. But Linda, oh. She slapped him on the cheek. Turned into a savage, she shouted, having young ones like an animal. If it hadn't been for you, I might have gone to the inspector. I might have got away, but not with a baby. That would have been too shameful. He saw that she was going to hit him again, and lifted his arm to guard his face. Oh, don't, Linda, please don't. Little beast! She pulled down his arm. His face was uncovered. Don't, Linda. He shut his eyes, expecting the blow. But she didn't hit him. After a little time, he opened his eyes again and saw that she was looking at him. He tried to smile at her. Suddenly, she put her arms round him and kissed him again and again. Sometimes, for several days, Linda didn't get up at all. She lay in bed and was sad, or else she drank the stuff that Popeye brought and laughed a great deal and went to sleep. Damn, I need to come to more streams. This is way too relaxing. Yeah, it's always great to have people in the stream. Glad you stopped by today, Bees. Hope you're enjoying it. I have arrived to be a problem. What have I missed? Why are we beating the heck out of Linda? Oh, welcome in, Stephanie. We just started reading chapter 8, and we're reflecting on some time during John's childhood. When Linda was being a normal, quote-unquote, civilized person and sleeping around with all the men in the reservation, and the women were not very happy about it, so they started beating the shit out of her. She started beating the shit out of John, and then stopped. But, yeah, just a little trauma background for John this morning. That's all you've missed so far, I think. Let's see, where are we then? Sometimes she was sick. Often she forgot to wash him, and there was nothing to eat except cold tortillas. He remembered the first time she found those little animals in his hair, how she screamed and screamed. The happiest times were when she told him about the other place. And you really can go flying whenever you like. Whenever you like. And she would tell him about the lovely music that came out of a box, and all the nice games you could play, and the delicious things to eat and drink, and the light that came when you pressed a little thing in the wall, and the pictures that you could hear and feel and smell, as well as see, and another box for making nice smells, and the pink and green and blue and silver houses as high as mountains, and everybody happy, and no one ever sad or angry, and everyone belonging to everyone else, and the boxes where you could see and hear what was happening at the other side of the world, and the babies in lovely clean bottles, everything so clean, no nasty smells, no dirt at all, and people never lonely, but living together and being so happy and jolly. Like the summer dances here in Malpais, but much happier, and the happiness being there every day, every day. He listened by the hour. Okay, gotcha. Love a little trauma background. Ready for more of this insanity. Well, I hope you're having a good day. I'm having a okay day. This is the first day I'm operating on a schedule again in a while, so it's tricky. I didn't sleep. Let's see. Listen by the hour. And sometimes, when he and the other children were tired with too much playing, one of the old men of the Pueblo would talk to them in those other words of the great transformer of the world, and of the long fight between right hand and left hand, between wet and dry, of Awanawilona, who made a great fog by thinking in the night, and then made the whole world out of the fog, of Mother Earth and Sky Father, of Ahayuta and Marcelima, the twins of War and Chance, of Jesus and Pukong, of Mary and Etsanatlehi. Etsanatlehi. The woman who makes herself young again, of the black stone at Laguna, and the great eagle and Our Lady of Acoma. Strange stories, all the more wonderful to him for being told in the other words, and so not fully understood. Lying in bed, he would think of heaven and London and Our Lady of Acoma and the rows and rows of babies in clean bottles, and Jesus flying up, and Linda flying up, and the great director of world hatcheries and Awanawilona. Lots of men came to see Linda. Boys began to point their fingers at him. In strange other words, they said that Linda was bad. They called her names he did not understand, but that he knew were bad names. One day they sang a song about her, again and again. He threw stones at them. They threw back. A sharp stone cut his cheek. The blood wouldn't stop. He was covered with blood. Linda taught him to read. With a piece of charcoal, she drew pictures on the wall. An animal sitting down, a baby inside a bottle. Then she wrote letters. The cat is on the mat. The tot is in the pot. He learned quickly and easily. When he knew how to read all the words she wrote on the wall, Linda opened the big wooden box and pulled out from under those funny little red trousers she never wore a thin little book. He'd often seen it before. When you're bigger, she had said, you can read it. Well, now he was big enough. He was proud. I'm afraid you won't find it very exciting, she said. But it's the only thing I have, she sighed. If only you could see the lovely reading machines we used to have in London. He began reading. The chemical and bacteriological conditioning of the embryo. Practical instructions for beta embryo store workers. It took him a quarter of an hour to read the title alone. He threw the book on the floor. Beastly, beastly book, he said, and began to cry. The boys still sang their horrible song about Linda. Sometimes, too, they laughed at him for being so ragged. When he tore his clothes, Linda did not know how to mend them. In the other place, she told him, people threw away clothes with holes in them and got new ones. Rags, rags, the boys used to shout at him. But I can read, he said to himself, and they can't. They didn't even know what reading is. It was fairly easy. If he thought hard enough about the reading, to pretend that he didn't mind when they made fun of him. He asked Linda to give him the book again. The more the boys pointed and sang, the harder he read. Soon he could read all the words quite well, even the longest. But what did they mean? He asked Linda, but even when she could answer, it didn't seem to make it very clear, and generally she couldn't answer at all. What are chemicals? He would ask. Oh, stuff like magnesium salts and alcohol for keeping the delta and epsilon small and backward, and calcium carbonate for bones and all that sort of thing. But how do you make chemicals, Linda? Where do they come from? Well, I don't know. You get them out of bottles. And when the bottles are empty, you send up to the chemical store for more. It's the chemical store people who make them, I suppose. Or else they send to the factory for them. I don't know. I never did any chemistry. My job was always with the embryos. It was the same with everything else he asked about. Linda never seemed to know. The old men of the Pueblo had much more definite answers. The seed of men and all creatures, the seed of the sun and the seed of earth and the seed of the sky, Awanawilona, made them all out of the fog of increase. Now, the world has 4 wombs, and he laid the seeds in the lowest of the 4 wombs, and gradually the seeds began to grow. One day, John calculated later that it must have been soon after his 12th birthday. He came home and found a book that he had never seen before lying on the floor in the bedroom. It was a thick book and looked very old. The binding had been eaten by mice. Some of its pages were loose and crumpled. That's fair. New schedules can be tiring, but you got this. I'm excited for more books. Thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate the encouragement. It was a thick book and looked very old. The binding had been eaten by mice. Some of its pages were loose and crumpled. He picked it up, looked at the title page. The book was called The Complete Works of William Shakespeare. Linda was lying on the bed, sipping that horrible stinking mescal out of a cup. Pope brought it, she said. Her voice was thick and hoarse, like somebody else's voice. It was lying in one of the chests on the Antelope Kiva, It's supposed to have been there for hundreds of years. I expect it's true, because I looked at it and it seemed to be full of nonsense, uncivilized. Still, it'll be good enough for you to practice your reading on." She took a last sip, set the cup down on the floor beside the bed, turned over on her side, hiccuped once or twice, and went to sleep. He opened the book at random. "I have Shakespeare tattoo. This book knows me." Nice. "Nay, but to live in the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying and making love over the nasty sty." The strange words rolled through his mind, rumbled like the drums at the summer dances, if the drums could have spoken, like the men singing the corn song, beautiful, beautiful so that you cried. Like old Mitsima saying magic over his feathers and his carved sticks and his bits of bone and stone. Kaiathlat silu tsiloque siloque tsiloque. Kai silu silu tsitl. But better than Mitsima's magic, because it meant more, because it talked to him, talked wonderfully and only half understandably. Terrible, beautiful magic about Linda lying there snoring with the empty cup on the floor beside the bed, about Linda and Pope. He hated Pope more and more. A man can smile and be a villain, remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, landless villain. What did the words exactly mean? He only half knew, but their magic was strong and went on rumbling in his head. And somehow it was as though he had never really hated Pope before, never really hated him because he had never been able to say how much he hated him. But now he had these words like drums and singing and magic. These words and the strange story out of which they were taken. He couldn't make head or tail of it, but it was wonderful, wonderful all the same. They gave him a reason for hating Pope, and they made his hatred more real. They even made Pope himself more real. One day, when he came in from playing, the door of the inner room was open, and he saw them lying together on the bed, asleep, while Linda and Pope, asleep, white Linda and Pope almost black beside her, with one arm under her shoulders and the other dark hand on her breast, and one of the plaits of his long hair lying across her throat, like a black snake trying to strangle her. Pope's gourd and a cup were standing on the floor next to the bed. Linda was snoring. His heart seemed to have disappeared and left a hole. He was empty and cold and rather sick and giddy. He leaned against the wall to steady himself, remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, like drums, like the men singing for the corn, like magic. The words repeated and repeated themselves in his head. From being cold, he was suddenly hot. His cheeks burnt with the rush of blood. The room swam and darkened before his eyes. He ground his teeth. "I'll kill him, I'll kill him, I'll kill him," he kept saying, and suddenly there were more words. "When he is drunk asleep, or in his rage, or in the incestuous pleasure of his bed." The magic was on his side. The magic explained and gave orders. He stepped back in the outer room. "When he is drunk asleep." The knife for the meat was lying on the floor near the fireplace. He picked it up and tiptoed to the door again. "When he is drunk asleep, drunk asleep." He ran across the room and stabbed. Oh, the blood. Stabbed again, as Pope heaved out of his sleep. Lifted his hand to stab once more, but found his wrist caught, held, and twisted. He couldn't move. He was trapped. And there were Pope's small black eyes, very close, staring into his own. Drunk asleep is no fun. That's boring-ass drunk. Yeah, I think Linda is definitely missing the soma, and that's why she's just getting trashed. And that's because the soma is a really potent narcotic. So I can imagine wanting to have a connect with mezcal when you're used to being able to just clock out for the rest of the day with a pill. let's see. There were 2 cuts. Okay. He looked away. There were 2 cuts on Pope's left shoulder. Oh, look at the blood, Linda was crying. Look at the blood. She'd never been able to bear the sight of blood. Pope lifted his other hand to strike him, he thought. He stiffened to receive the blow, but the hand only took him under the chin and turned his face, so that he had to look again into Pope's eyes. For a long time, for hours and hours, and suddenly he couldn't help it. He began to cry. Pope burst out laughing. Go, he said, in the other Indian words. Go, my brave Ayayuta. He ran out into the other room to hide his tears. You are 15, said old Mitsima in the Indian words. Now I may teach you to work the clay. Squatting by the river, they worked together. First of all, said Mitsima, taking a lump of the wetted clay between his hands, we make a little moon. The old man squeezed the lump into a disc, then bent up the edges. The moon became a shallow cup. Slowly and skillfully he imitated the old man's delicate gestures. A moon, a cup, and now a snake. Mitsima rolled out another piece of clay into a long, flexible cylinder, hooped it into a circle, and pressed it onto the rim of the cup. And then another snake, and another, and another. Round by round, Mitsima built up the sides of the pot. It was narrow, it bulged, it narrowed again towards the neck. Mitsima squeezed and patted, stroked and scraped, and there at last it stood in the shape the familiar water pot of Malpais, but creamy white instead of black, and still soft to the touch. The crooked parody of Mitsima's, his own, stood beside it. Looking at the 2 pots, he had to laugh. But the next one will be better, he said, and began to moisten another piece of clay. To fashion, to give form, to feel his fingers gaining in skill and power. This gave him an extraordinary pleasure. ABC, vitamin D, he sang to himself as he worked. The fat's in the liver, the cod's in the sea. And Mitsima also sang, a song about killing a bear. They worked all day, and all day he was filled with an intense, absorbing happiness. Next winter, said old Mitsima, I will teach you to make the bow. He stood for a long time outside the house. At last, the ceremonies within were finished. The door opened. They came out. Kothlu came out first, his right hand outstretched and tightly closed, as though over some precious jewel. Her clenched hands similarly outstretched. Kiakime followed. They walked in silence, and in silence, behind them, came the brothers and sisters and cousins and all the troop of old people. They walked out of the pueblo, across the mesa. At the edge of the cliff, they halted, facing the early morning sun. Kothlu opened his hand. A pinch of cornmeal lay white on the palm. He breathed on it, murmured a few words, and then threw it, a handful of white dust, toward the sun. Kiakime did the same. Then Kiakime's father stepped forward, and holding up a feathered prayer stick, made a long prayer, then threw the stick after the cornmeal. It is finished, said old Mitsima in a loud voice. They are married. Well, said Linda as they turned away. All I can say is, it does seem a lot of fuss to make about so little. In civilized countries, when a boy wants to have a girl, he just... But where are you going, John? He paid no attention to her calling, but ran on, away, anywhere to be by himself. It is finished. Old Mitsima's words repeated themselves in his mind. Finished. Finished. In silence and from a long way off, but violently, desperately, hopelessly, he had loved Kiakime, and now it was finished. He was 16. At the full moon, in the antelope kiva, secrets would be told. Secrets would be done and born. I'm so tired of this version of civilization. I don't jive with it, and I feel so bad for John. Yeah, it's Now, this is kind of rough, especially considering like his mother is absolutely not coping, so is not, teaching him or raising him in any way to fit into this society where he's trapped. So, yeah, it definitely sucks for him. They would go down, boys, into the kiva and come out again, men. The boys were all afraid and at the same time impatient. At last it was the day. The sun went down, the moon rose. He went with the others. Men were standing, dark, at the entrance to the kiva. The ladder went down into the red-lighted depths. Already, the leading boys had begun to climb down. Suddenly, one of the men stepped forward, caught him by the arm, and pulled him out of the ranks. He broke free and dodged back into his place among the others. This time the man struck him, pulled his hair. "Not for you, white hair. Not for the son of the she-dog," said one of the other men. The boys laughed. "Go!" And as he still hovered on the fringes of the group, "Go!" the men shouted again. One of them bent down, took a stone, threw it. "Go, go, go!" There was a shower of stones. Bleeding, he ran away into the darkness. Sorry, I just whacked my mic. From the red-lit kiva came the noise of singing. The last of the boys had climbed down the ladder. He was all alone. All alone, outside the pueblo, on the bare plain of the mesa. The rock was like bleached bones in the moonlight. Down in the valley, the coyotes were howling at the moon. The bruises hurt him. The cuts were still bleeding, but it was not for pain that he sobbed. It was because he was alone, because he had been driven out, alone, into his skeleton world of rocks and moonlight. I don't think whacking your mic is appropriate on stream. Yeah, it hasn't been a good enough mic to deserve a good whacking. Let's see, moonlight. Down in the valley, the coyotes were howling at the moon. The bruises hurt him. The cuts were still bleeding, but it was not for pain that he sobbed. It was because he was all alone, because he had been driven out, alone, into this skeleton world of rocks and moonlight. At the edge of the precipice, he sat down. The moon was behind him. He looked down into the black shadow of the mesa, into the black shadow of death. He had only to take one step, one little jump. He held out his right hand in the moonlight. From the cut on his wrist, the blood was still oozing. Every few seconds, a drop fell, dark, almost colorless in the dead light. Drop, drop, drop. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. He had discovered time and death and God. Alone, always alone, the young man was saying. The words awoke a plaintive echo in Bernard's mind. Alone, alone. "So am I," he said, on a gush of confidingness. "Terribly alone." "Are you?" John looked surprised. "I thought that in the other place, Linda always said that nobody was ever alone there." Bernard blushed uncomfortably. "You see," he said, mumbling and with eyes averted, "I'm rather different from most people, I suppose, if one happens to be decanted different." "Yes, that's just it," the young man nodded. "If one's different, one's bound to be lonely. They're beastly to one. Do you know? They shut me out of absolutely everything. When the other boys were sent out to spend the night on the mountains, when you have to dream which your sacred animal is, they wouldn't let me go with the others. They wouldn't tell me any of the secrets. I did it by myself, though," he added. "Didn't eat anything for 5 days and then went out one night alone into those mountains there." He pointed. Patronizingly, Bernard smiled. "And did you dream of anything?" he asked. The other nodded. "But I mustn't tell you what." He was silent for a little, then in a low voice. "Once," he went on, "I did something that none of the others did. I stood against a rock in the middle of the day, in summer, with my arms out, like Jesus on the cross." "What on earth for?" "I wanted to know what it was like being crucified, hanging there in the sun. Why? Why? Well, he hesitated. Because I felt I ought to. If Jesus could stand it, and then, if one has done something wrong, besides, I was unhappy. That was another reason. It seems a funny way of curing your unhappiness, said Bernard. But on second thoughts, he decided that there was, after all, some sense in it, better than taking soma. I fainted after a time, said the young man. Fell down on my face. See the mark where I cut myself? He lifted the thick yellow hair from his forehead. The scar showed, pale and puckered, on his right temple. Bernard looked, and then quickly, with a little shudder, averted his eyes. His conditioning made him not so much pitiful as profoundly squeamish. The mere suggestion of illness or wounds was to him not only horrifying, but even repulsive and rather disgusting, like dirt or deformity or old age. Hastily, he changed the subject. I wonder if you'd like to come back to London with us, he asked. I'm going to take a break for some water for a moment here. I wonder if you'd like to come back to London with us. Jesus Christ. Let me see. I wonder if you'd like to come back to London with us, he asked, making the first move in a campaign whose strategy he had been secretly elaborating ever since, in the little house, he had realized who the father of this young savage must be. Would you like that? The young man's face lit up. Do you really mean it? Of course, if I can get permission, that is. Linda, too? Well, he hesitated doubtfully. That revolting creature? No, it was impossible. Unless... It suddenly occurred to Bernard that her very revoltingness might prove an enormous asset. But of course, he cried, making up for his first hesitations with an excuse of noisy cordiality. Thanks for the care package, Bees.
Come on, stretch now. Come on, move it, Rock, move it!
Oh, it stretched right back at all. Oh, fuck. Making up for his first hesitations with an excess of noisy cordiality. The young man drew a deep breath. To think it should be coming true. What I've dreamt of all my life. Do you remember what Miranda says? Who's Miranda? But the young man had evidently not heard the question. Oh, wonder, he was saying, and his eyes shone, his face was brightly flushed. How many godly creatures are there? How beauteous mankind is. The flush suddenly deepened. He was thinking of Lanina, of an angel in bottle green viscose, lustrous with youth and skin. Lustrous with youth and skin food, plump, benevolently smiling. His voice faltered. Oh, brave new world, he began, and then suddenly interrupted himself. The blood had left his cheeks. He was as pale as paper. Are you married to her? He asked. Am I what? Married, you know, forever. They say forever in the Indian words. It can't be broken. Ford, no. Bernard couldn't help laughing. John also laughed, but for another reason. Laughed for pure joy. Oh, brave new world, he repeated. Oh, brave new world that has such people in it. Let's start at once. You have a most peculiar way of talking sometimes, said Bernard, staring at the young man in perplexed astonishment. And anyhow, hadn't you better wait till you actually see the new world? Chapter 9. Lanina felt herself entitled, after this day of queerness and horror, to a complete and absolute holiday. As soon as they got back to the rest house, she swallowed 6 half-gram tablets of soma, lay down on her bed, and within 10 minutes had embarked for lunar eternity. It would be 18 hours at the least before she was in time again. Bernard, meanwhile, lay pensive and wide-eyed in the dark. It was long after midnight before he fell asleep. Long after midnight, but his insomnia had not been fruitless. He had a plan. Punctually on the following morning, at 10 o'clock, the green-uniformed octoroon stepped out of his helicopter. Bernard was waiting for him among the agaves. "Miss Crown's gone on Soma holiday," he explained. "Can hardly be back before 5, which leaves us 7 hours. Jeez, man, please do not die, lol. Yeah, she's getting absolutely wasted, and I don't know if I could really blame her. He could fly to Santa Fe, do all the business he had to do, and be in Malpais again. Long before she woke up. She'll be quite safe here by herself. Safe as helicopters, the octoroon assured him. They climbed into the machine and started off at once. 10:34, they landed on the roof at the Santa Fe post office. At 10:37, Bernard had got through to the World Controller's office in Whitehall. At 10:39, he was speaking to his Fordship's fourth personal secretary. At 10:44, he was repeating his story to the first secretary, and that at 10:47 and a half, it was the deep, resonant voice of Mustafa Mond himself that sounded in his ears. "I ventured to think," stammered Bernard, "that your Fordship might find the matter of sufficient scientific interest." "Yes, I do find it of sufficient scientific interest," said the deep voice. "Bring these two individuals back to London with you." "Your Fordship is aware that I shall need a special permit." "The necessary orders," said Mustafa Mond, "are being sent to the warden of the reservation at this moment. You'll proceed at once to the warden's office. Good morning, Mr. Marks." There was silence. Bernard hung up the receiver and hurried up to the roof. "Warden's office," he said to the gamma-green octoroon. At 10:54, Bernard was shaking hands with the warden. "Delighted, Mr. Marks, delighted." His boom was deferential. "We have just received special orders." "I know," said Bernard, interrupting him. "I was talking to his Fordship on the phone a moment ago." His bored tone implied that he was in the habit of talking to his Fordship every day of the week. He dropped into a chair. "If you'll kindly take all the necessary steps as soon as possible, he emphatically repeated. He was thoroughly enjoying himself. At 11:03, he had all the necessary papers in his pocket. "So long," he said patronizingly to the warden, who had accompanied him as far as the lift gates. "So long." He walked across to the hotel, had a bath, a vibrovac massage, and an electrolytic shave, listened into the morning's news, looked in for half an hour on the televisor, ate a leisured luncheon, and at 2:30 flew back with the octoroon to Malpais. The young man stood outside the rest house. "Bernard! Bernard!" he called. "Bernard!" There was no answer. Noiseless on his deerskin moccasins, he ran up the steps and tried the door. The door was locked. They were gone. Gone. It was the most terrible thing that had ever happened to him. She had asked him to come and see them, and now they were gone. He sat down on the steps and cried. Half an hour later, it occurred to him to look through the window. The first thing he saw was the green suitcase with the initials LC painted on the lid. Joy flared up like fire within him. He picked up a stone. The smashed glass tinkled on the floor. A moment later, he was inside the room. He opened the green suitcase, and all at once he was breathing Lenina's perfume, filling his lungs with her essential being. His heart beat wildly. For a moment, he was almost faint. Then, bending over the precious box, he touched, he lifted into the light, he examined. The zippers of Lenina's spare pair of viscose velveteen shorts were at first a puzzle, then solved, a delight. Zip, and then zip, zip, and then zip. He was enchanted. Her green slippers were the most beautiful things he had ever seen. He unfolded a pair of zippy kmicknicks, blushed, put them hastily away again, but kissed a perfumed acetate handkerchief and wound a scarf round his neck. Opening a box, he spilt a cloud of scented powder. His hands were floury with the stuff. He wiped them on his chest, on his shoulders, on his bare arms. Delicious perfume. He shut his eyes. He rubbed his cheek against his own powdered arm. Touch of smooth skin against his face. Scent in his nostrils of musky dust. Her real presence. Lenina, he whispered. Lenina. A noise made him start. Made him guiltily turn. He crammed up his thieveries into the suitcase and shut the lid, then listened again, looked. Not a sign of life, not a sign. And yet he had certainly heard something like a sigh, something like the creak of a board. He tiptoed to the door, and cautiously opening it, found himself looking onto a broad landing. I still have you while I was putting my boys' harnesses on. My guys are being creepy, like, I love a man, obsessed, but don't put my clothes on. Yeah. Yeah. Shit, where? On the opposite side of the landing was another door, ajar. He stepped out, pushed, peeped. There, on a low bed, the sheet flung back, dressed in a pair of pink one-piece zippy pajamas, lay Lenina, fast asleep, and so beautiful in the midst of her curls, so touchingly childish with her pink toes and her grave sleeping face, so trustful in the helplessness of her limp hands and melted limbs, that the tears came to his eyes. With an infinity of quite unnecessary precautions, for nothing short of a pistol shot could have called Lenina back from her Soma holiday before the appointed time, he entered the room. He knelt on the floor beside the bed. He gazed. He clasped his hands. His lips moved. Her eyes, he murmured. Her eyes, her hair, her cheek, her gait, her voice. Handiest denied discourse, oh, that her hand, in whose comparison all whites are ink, writing their own reproach, to whose soft seizure the signet's down is harsh. A fly buzzed around her. He waved it away. Flies, he remembered. On the white wonder of dear Juliet's hand may seize and steal immortal blessings from her lips, who, even in pure and vestal modesty, still blush as thinking their own kisses sin. Very slowly, with the hesitating gesture of one who reaches forward to stroke a shy and possibly rather dangerous bird, he put out his hand. It hung there, trembling, within an inch of those limp fingers, on the verge of contact. Did he dare to profane with his unworthiest hand that? No, he didn't. The bird was too dangerous. His hand dropped back. How beautiful she was. How beautiful. Then suddenly he found himself reflecting that he had only to take hold of the zipper at her neck and give it one long, strong pull. He shut his eyes. He shook his head with the gesture of a dog shaking its ears as it emerged from the water. Detestable thought. He was ashamed of himself. Pure and vestal modesty. There was a humming in the chair. Another fly trying to steal immortal blessings? A wasp? He looked, saw nothing. The humming grew louder and louder, localized itself as being outside the shuttered windows. The plane. In a panic, he scrambled to his feet and ran into the other room, vaulted through the open window, and hurrying along the path between the tall agaves, was in time to receive Bernard Marks as he climbed out of the helicopter. All right, I'll be right back. I have to watch my puppers. Oh, that's what it was. Okay. My guy, I'm not even out the door. Stop being a perv. He'll come through that book and show him these hands. Yeah, you get him, Steph. All right, it's 3 minutes to the ad, and we're about to start chapter. I'm gonna do the ad right now, if I can. I think I can. Yeah, I'm gonna push the ad forward, and I'm gonna grab some water and clear my sinuses. I shall return in a moment, or a few minutes. It might take a little bit longer than the ad. We'll see. Let's see. Okay, yeah, I did forget to mute the mic. Okay, let's. I hope too much noise didn't come through. Let's see here. All right, back to chapter 10. The hands of all the 4,000 electric clocks in all of the Bloomsbury Center's 4,000 rooms marked 27 minutes past 2. This hive of industry, as the director was fond of calling it, was in the full buzz of work. Everyone was busy, everything in ordered motion. Under the microscopes, their long tails furiously lashing, spermatozoa were burrowing headfirst into eggs. And fertilized, the eggs were expanding, dividing, or if bokonoskified, budding and breaking up into whole populations of separate embryos. From the social predestination room, the escalators went rumbling down into the basement, and there, in the crimson darkness, stewing warm on their cushion of peritoneum and gorged with blood surrogate and hormones, the fetuses grew and grew, or poisoned, languished into a stunted epsilon hood. With a faint hum and rattle, the moving racks crawled imperceptibly through the weeks and the recapitulated eons to where, in the decanting room, the newly unbottled babes uttered their first yell of horror and amazement. Shit. Ah. Let's see. The dynamos purred in the sub-basement. The lifts rushed up and down. On all the 11 floors of nurseries, it was feeding time. From 1,800 bottles, 1,800 carefully labeled infants were simultaneously sucking down their pint of pasteurized external secretion. Above them, in 10 successive layers of dormitory, the little boys and girls who were still young enough to need an afternoon's sleep were as busy as everyone else, though they did not know it, listening unconsciously to hypnopedic lessons in hygiene and sociability, in class consciousness, and the toddler's love life. Above these, again, were the playrooms where, the weather having turned to rain, 900 older children were amusing themselves with bricks and clay modeling, Hunt the Zipper, and erotic play. Buzz, buzz, the hive was humming, busily, joyfully. Blithe was the singing of the young girls over their test tubes. The predestinators whistled as they worked. And in the decanting room, what glorious jokes were cracked above the emptied bottles. But the director's face, as he entered the fertilizing room with Henry Foster, was grave, wooden with severity. A public example, he was saying. In this room, because it contains more high-caste workers than any other in the center, I have told him to meet me here at 2:30. Why does his work... He does his work very well, put in Henry with hypocritical generosity. I know, but that's all the more reason for severity. His intellectual eminence carries with it corresponding moral responsibilities. The greater a man's talents, the greater his power to lead astray. It is better that one should suffer than that many should be corrupted. Consider the matter dispassionately, Mr. Foster, and you will see that no offense is so heinous as unorthodoxy of behavior. Murder kills only the individual, and after all, what is an individual? With a sweeping gesture, he indicated the rows of microscopes, the test tubes, the incubators. We can make a new one with the greatest ease, as many as we like. Unorthodoxy threatens more than the life of a mere individual. It strikes at society itself. Yes, at society itself, he repeated. Ah, but here he comes. Bernard had entered the room and was advancing between the rows of fertilizers toward them. A veneer of jaunty self-confidence thinly concealed his nervousness. The voice in which he said, "Good morning, Director," was absolutely too loud. That in which, correcting his mistake, he said, "You asked me to come and speak to you here," ridiculously soft, a squeak. "Yes, Mr. Marks," said the director portentously. "I did ask you to come to meet me here. You returned from your holiday last night, I understand." "Yes," Bernard answered. "Yes," repeated the director, lingering a serpent on the S. Then, suddenly raising his voice, "Ladies and gentlemen," he trumpeted, "ladies and gentlemen." The singing of the girls over their test tubes, the preoccupied whistling of the microscopists, suddenly ceased. There was a profound silence. Everyone looked round. "Ladies and gentlemen," the director repeated once more, "excuse me for thus interrupting your labors. A painful duty constrains me. The security and stability of society are in danger. Yes, in danger, ladies and gentlemen. This man," He pointed accusingly at Bernard. "This man who stands before you here, this Alpha Plus, to whom so much has been given, and from whom, in consequence, so much must be expected, this colleague of yours, or should I anticipate and say this ex-colleague, has grossly betrayed the trust imposed in him by his heretical views on sport and soma, by the scandalous unorthodoxy of his sex life, by his refusal to obey the teachings of our Ford and behave out of office hours, even as a little infant." Here the director made the sign of the T. "He has proved himself an enemy of society, a subverter, ladies and gentlemen, of all order and stability, a conspirator against civilization itself. For this reason I propose to dismiss him with ignominy from the post he has held in this center. I propose forthwith to apply for his transference to a sub-center of the lowest order, and that his punishment may serve the best interest of society, as far as possible removed from any important center of population. In Iceland, he will have small opportunity to lead others astray by his unfordly example." The director paused. Then, folding his arms, he turned impressively to Bernard. "Marx," he said, "can you show any reason why I should not now execute the judgment passed upon you?" "Yes, I can," Bernard answered in a very loud voice. Somewhat taken aback, but still majestically. "Then show it," said the director. "Certainly, but it's in the passage. One moment." Bernard hurried to the door and threw it open. "Come in," he commanded, and the reason came in and showed itself. There was a gasp, a murmur of astonishment and horror. A young girl screamed. Standing on a chair to get a better view, someone upset 2 test tubes full of spermatozoa, bloated, sagging, and among those firm, youthful bodies, those undistorted faces, a strange and terrifying monster of middle-agedness. Linda advanced into the room, coquettishly smiling her broken and discolored smile, and rolling as she walked, with what was meant to be a voluptuous undulation, her enormous haunches. Bernard walked beside her. "There he is," he said, pointing at the director. "Did you think I didn't recognize him?" "There he is," he said, pointing at the director. "Did you think I didn't recognize him?" Linda asked indignantly, then turning to the director. "Of course I know you, Tomakin. I should have known you anywhere, among 1,000, but perhaps you've forgotten me. Don't you remember? Don't you remember, Tomakin? You're Linda?" She stood looking at him, her head on one side, still smiling, but with a smile that became progressively in the face of the director's expression of petrified disgust, less and less self-confident, that wavered and finally went out. "Don't you remember, Tomakin?" she repeated in a voice that trembled. Her eyes were anxious, agonized. The blotched and sagging face twisted grotesquely into the grimace of extreme grief. "Tomakin," she held out her arms. Someone began to titter. "What's the meaning," began the director, "of this monstrous—" Tomakin, she ran forward, her blanket trailing behind her, threw her arms round his neck, hid her face on his chest. A howl of laughter went up irrepressibly. "This monstrous practical joke," the director shouted, red in the face. He tried to disengage himself from the embrace. Desperately she clung. "But I'm Linda! I'm Linda!" The laughter drowned her voice. "You made me have a baby!" She screamed above the uproar. There was a sudden and appalling hush. Eyes floated uncomfortably, not knowing where to look. The director went suddenly pale, stopped struggling and stood, his hands on her wrist, staring down at her horrified. "Yes, a baby. And I was its mother." She flung the obscenity like a challenge into the outraged silence. Then, suddenly breaking away from him, ashamed, covered her face with her hands, sobbing. "It wasn't my fault, Tomakin, because I always did my drill, didn't I? Didn't I? Always. I don't know how, if you know how awful, Tomakine. But he was a comfort to me all the same. Turning towards the door, John, she called, John. He came in at once, paused for a moment just inside the door, looked round, then soft on his moccasined feet strode quickly across the room, fell on his knees in front of the director, and said in a clear voice, My father. The word for father was not so much obscene as with its connotation of something at one... For father was not so much obscene as with its connotation of something at one removed from the loathsomeness and moral obliquity of childbearing, merely gross, a scatological rather than pornographic impropriety. The comically smutty word relieved what had become a quite intolerable tension. Laughter broke out, enormous, almost hysterical, peal after peal, as though it would never stop. My father, and it was the director. My father, oh Ford, oh Ford. That was really too good. The whooping and the roaring renewed themselves. Faces seemed on the point of disintegration. Tears were streaming. 6 more test tubes of spermatozoa were upset. My father. Pale, wild-eyed, the director glared about him in an agony of bewildered humiliation. My father. The laughter, which had shown signs of dying away, broke out again more loudly than ever. He put his hands over his ears and rushed out of the room. All right, Chapter 11. After the scene in the fertilizing room, all upper-caste London was wild to see this delicious creature who had fallen on his knees before the director of hatcheries and conditioning, or rather the ex-director, for the poor man had resigned immediately afterwards and never set foot inside the centre again, had flopped down and called him, the joke was almost too good to be true, my father. Linda, on the contrary, cut no ice. Nobody had the smallest desire to see Linda. To say one was a mother, that was past a joke. It was an obscenity. Moreover, she wasn't a real savage. Had been hatched out of a bottle and conditioned like anyone else, so couldn't have really quaint ideas. Finally, and this was by far the strongest reason for people's not wanting to see poor Linda, there was her appearance. Fat, having lost her youth, with bad teeth and a blotched complexion, and that figure, Ford. You simply couldn't look at her without feeling sick. Yes, positively sick. So the best people were quite determined not to see Linda, and Linda, for her part, had no desire to see them. The return to civilization was for her the return to Soma, was the possibility of lying in bed and taking holiday after holiday without ever having to come back to a headache or a fit of vomiting, without ever being made to feel as you always felt after peyote. As though you'd done something so shamefully antisocial that you could never hold up your head again. Soma played none of those unpleasant tricks. The holiday it gave was perfect, and if the morning after was disagreeable, it was so, not intrinsically, but only by comparison with the joys of the holiday. The remedy was to make the holiday continuous. Greedily she clamored for ever larger, ever more frequent doses. Dr. Shaw at first demurred, then let her have what she wanted. She took as many as 20 grams a day, which will finish her off in a month or two, the doctor confided to Bernard. One day the respiratory center will be paralyzed. No more breathing. Finished. A good thing, too. We could rejuvenate, of course it would be different, but we can't. Surprisingly, as everyone thought, for on Soma holiday Linda was most conveniently out of the way, John raised objections. But aren't you shortening her life by giving her so much? In one sense, yes, Dr. Shaw admitted, but in another, we're actually lengthening it. The young man stared, uncomprehending. Soma may make you lose a few years in time, the doctor went on. But think of the enormous, immeasurable durations it can give you out of time. Every Soma holiday is a bit of what our ancestors used to call eternity. John began to understand. Eternity was in our lips and eyes, he murmured. Eh? Nothing. Of course, Dr. Shaw went on, you can't allow people to go popping off into eternity if they've got any serious work to do, but as she hasn't got any serious work... All the same, John persisted, I don't believe it's right. The doctor shrugged his shoulders. Well, of course, if you prefer to have her screaming mad all the time. In the end, John was forced to give in. Linda got her soma. Thenceforward, she remained in her little room on the 37th floor of Bernard's apartment house, in bed, with the radio and television always on, and the patchouli tap just dripping, and the soma tablets within reach of her hand. There she remained, and yet wasn't there at all, was all the time away, infinitely far away, on holiday in some other world, where the music of the radio was a labyrinth of sonorous colors, a sliding, palpitating labyrinth that led, by what beautifully inevitable windings, to a bright center of absolute conviction, where the dancing images of the television box were the performers in some indescribably delicious, all-singing feelie, where the dripping patchouli was more than scent, was the sun, was a million saxophones, was Popeye making love, only much more so, incomparably more, and without end. No, we can't rejuvenate, but I'm very glad, Dr. Shaw had concluded, to have had this opportunity to see an example of senility in a human being. Thank you so much for calling me in. He shook Bernard warmly by the hand. It was John, then, they were all after, and it was only through Bernard, his accredited guardian, that John could be seen. Bernard now found himself, for the first time in his life, treated not merely normally, but as a person of outstanding importance. There was no more talk of the alcohol in his blood surrogate, no jibes at his personal appearance. Henry Foster went out of his way to be friendly. Benito Hoover made him a present of 6 packets of sex hormone chewing gum. The assistant predestinator came out and cadged him almost abjectly for an invitation to one of Bernard's evening parties. As for the women, Bernard had only to hint at the possibility of an invitation, and he could have whichever of them he liked. Bernard's asked me to meet the savage next Wednesday, Fanny announced triumphantly. I'm so glad, said Lenina. And now you must admit that you were wrong about Bernard. Don't you think he's really rather sweet? Fanny nodded. And I must say, she said, I was quite agreeably surprised. The chief bottler, the director of predestination, 3 deputy assistant fertilizer generals, the professor of Feelies in the College of Emotional Engineering, the dean of the Westminster Community Singery, the supervisor of Bokanoscification. The list of Bernard's notabilities was interminable. I had 6 girls last week, he confided to Helmholtz Watts. 1 on Wednesday, 2 on Tuesday, 2 more on Friday, and 1 on Saturday. And if I'd had the time or the inclination, there were at least a dozen more who were only too anxious. Helmholtz listened to his boastings in a silence so gloomily disapproving that Bernard was offended. You're envious, he said. Helmholtz shook his head. Rather sad, that's all, he answered. Bernard went off in a huff. Never, he told himself, never would he speak to Helmholtz again. The days passed. Success went fizzily to Bernard's head, and in the process completely reconciled him, as any good intoxicant should do, to a world which, up till then, he had found very unsatisfactory. Insofar as it recognized him as important, the order of things was good, but reconciled by his success, he yet refused to forego the privilege of criticizing this order. For the act of criticizing heightened his sense of importance, made him feel larger. Moreover, he did genuinely believe that there were things to criticize. At the same time, he genuinely liked being a success, and having all the girls he wanted. For those who now, for the sake of the savage, paid their court to him, Bernard would parade a carping unorthodoxy. He was politely listened to, but behind his back people shook their heads. That young man will come to a bad end, they said, prophesying the more confidently prophesying the more confidently in that they themselves would in due course personally see to it that the end was bad. He won't find another savage to help him out the second time, they said. Meanwhile, however, there was the first savage. They were polite, and because they were polite, Bernard felt positively gigantic. Gigantic and at the same time light with elation, lighter than air. Lighter than air, said Bernard, pointing upwards. Like a pearl in the sky, high, high above them, the weather department's captive balloon shone rosily in the sunshine. The said savage, so ran Bernard's instructions, to be shown civilized life in all its aspects. He was being shown a bird's-eye view of it at the present, a bird's-eye view from the platform of the Charing T Tower. The station master and the resident meteorologist were acting as guides, but it was Bernard who did most of the talking. Intoxicated, he was behaving as though, at the very least, he were a visiting world controller, lighter than air. The Bombay green rocket dropped out of the sky. The passengers alighted. 8 identical Dravidian twins in khaki looked out of the 8 portholes of the cabin. The stewards. 1,250 kilometers an hour, said the station master impressively. What do you think of that, Mr. Savage? John thought it was very nice. Still, he said, Ariel could put a girdle around the earth in 40 minutes. The Savage, wrote Bernard in his report to Mustafa Mond, shows surprisingly little astonishment at or awe of civilized inventions. This is partly due, no doubt, to the fact that he has heard them talked about by the woman Linda, Mustafa Mond frowned. Does the fool think I'm too squeamish to see the word written out at full length? Partly on his interest being focused on what he calls the soul, which he persists in regarding as an entity independent of the physical environment. Which he persists in regarding as an entity independent of the physical environment, whereas, as I tried to point out to him, the controller skipped the next sentences and was just about to turn the page in search of something more interestingly concrete when his eye was caught by a series of quite extraordinary phrases. Though I must admit, he read, that I agree with the Savage in finding civilized infantility too easy or, as he puts it, not expensive enough, and I would like to take this opportunity of drawing your Fordship's attention to... Mustafa Mond's anger gave place almost at once to mirth. The idea of this creature solemnly lecturing him about the social order was really too grotesque. The man must have gone mad. I ought to give him a lesson, he said to himself, and then threw back his head and laughed aloud. For the moment, at any rate, the lesson would not be given. It was a small factory of lighting sets for helicopters, a branch of the Electrical Equipment Corporation. They were met on the roof itself, for that circular letter of recommendation from the controller was magical in its effects, by the chief technician and the human element manager. They walked downstairs into the factory. Each process, explained the human element manager, is carried out, so far as possible, by a single Bokanovsky group, and in effect, 83 almost noseless black brachycephalic deltas were cold pressing. The 56 four-spindle chucking and turning machines were being manipulated by 56 aquiline and ginger gammas. 107 heat-conditioned epsilon Senegalese were working in the foundry. 33 delta females, long-headed, sandy, with narrow pelvises, and all within 20 millimeters of 1 meter, 69 centimeters tall, were cutting screws. In the assembling room, the dynamos were being put together by 2 sets of Gamma Plus dwarves, and the two low work tables faced one another. Between them crawled the conveyor, with its load of separate parts. 47 blonde heads were confronted by 47 brown ones. 47 snubs by 47 hooks, 47 receding by 47 prognathous chins. The completed mechanisms were inspected by 18 identical curly auburn girls in gamma green, packed in crates by 34 short-legged left-handed male delta minuses, and loaded into the waiting trucks and lorries by 63 blue-eyed, flaxen, and freckled epsilon semi-morons. Oh, brave new world. By some malice of his memory, the savage had found himself repeating Miranda's words. Oh, brave new world that has such people in it. And I assure you, the human element manager concluded as they left the factory, we hardly ever have any trouble with our workers. We always find. But the savage had suddenly broken away from his companions and was violently retching behind a clump of laurels, as though the solid earth had been a helicopter in an air pocket. The savage, wrote Bernard, refuses to take soma and seems much distressed because the woman Linda, remains permanently on holiday. It is worthy of note that in spite of his mother's senility and the extreme repulsiveness of her appearance, the savage frequently goes to see her and appears to be much attracted to her, an interesting example of the way in which early conditioning can be made to modify and even run counter to natural impulses. In this case, the impulse to recoil from an unpleasant object. Okay, I'm back. What did I miss out of Chapter 10? Chapter 10. Looks like... Oops, I just totally lost my place. I should give him a lesson. Next page, okay. From Chapter 10, you just missed, Mustafa Mond, the world controller, has, Bernard showing John around the civilized world, and Bernard is getting a lot of attention from women because of his proximity to this curiosity in John. So that's where we're at so far. Right now, they're touring a factory with Bernard and John are touring a factory where they make helicopters, and it was just going through how every part of the assembly process in this factory is handled by a single Volkanovsky group. So basically, each level of production is handled by just one group of like these artificially created twins. So it was like 175 of the same person doing the same task in 175 stations, that kind of thing. Okay, so pricks acting like they're better than John. Got it. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, brave new world that has such people in it. Yes. Here we go. But the savage had suddenly broken away from his companions and was violently retching behind a clump of laurels as though... Oh, I already read this part. Yeah. The savage, wrote Bernard, refuses to take soma and seems much distressed because the woman Linda, his mother, remains permanently on holiday. It is worthy of note that in spite of his mother's senility and the extreme repulsiveness of her appearance, the savage frequently goes to see her and appears to be much attracted to her, an interesting example of the way in which early conditioning can be made to modify and even run counter to natural impulses, in this case, the impulse to recoil from an unpleasant object. At Eton, they alighted on the roof of upper school. On the opposite side of School Yard, 42 stories of Lupton's tower gleamed. Sorry, let me stop interrupting. Well, no, it's fine. I'm glad someone's actually asking things, because sometimes I'll just read through something and it can be horribly confusing, and I, don't know if it actually came through very well. 42 stories of Lupton's tower gleamed white in the sunshine. College on their left and on their right, the school community singery reared its venerable piles of ferroconcrete and vitaglass. In the center of the quadrangle stood the quaint old chrome steel statue of our Ford. Dr. Gaffney, the provost, and Miss Keat, the headmistress, received them as they stepped out of the plane. "Do you have many twins here?" the savage asked rather apprehensively as they sat out on their tour of inspection. "Oh no," the provost answered. "Eton is reserved exclusively for upper-class boys upper caste boys and girls, one egg, one adult. It makes education more difficult, of course, but as they'll be called upon to take responsibilities and deal with unexpected emergencies, it can't be helped, he sighed. Bernard, meanwhile, had taken a strong fancy to Miss Keat. If you're free any Monday, Wednesday, or Friday evening, he was saying, jerking his thumb towards the savage. He's curious, you know, Bernard added. Quaint. Miss Keat smiled, and her smile was really charming, he thought. Said thank you, would be delighted to come to one of his parties. The provost opened a door. And here we see an example of Bernard using his position as John's handler to be a incorrigible poonhound. He's not pimping John out. He's using John as a vehicle to attract women because he's a curiosity to all of society. Oops, wrong page. Okay, here we go. Miss Keat smiled, and her smile was really charming, he thought. Said thank you, would be delighted to come to one of his parties. The provost opened a door. 5 minutes in, that Alpha Double Plus classroom left John a trifle bewildered. What is elementary relativity, he whispered to Bernard. Bernard tried to explain, then thought better of it and suggested that they should go on to some other classroom. From behind a door in the corridor leading to the Beta Minus geography room, a ringing soprano voice called, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then with a weary impatience, as you were. Malthusian drill, explained the headmistress. Most of our girls are free martins, of course. I'm a free martin myself, she smiled at Bernard. But we have about 800 unsterilized ones who need constant drilling. Bernard's so gross. I know it's societal, but his behavior just feels so offensive, like he's an outlier among the outliers. Yeah, he's, they really do go out of the way making Bernard kind of a pathetic character in this book. It's I think it's pretty fun. Let's see, Malthusian drill. In the Beta Minus geography room, John learnt that a savage reservation is a place which, owing to unfavorable climatic or geological conditions, or poverty of natural resources, has not been worth the expense of civilizing. Click. The room was darkened, and suddenly, on the screen above the master's head, there were the penitents of a coma prostrating themselves before Our Lady, and wailing as John had heard them wail, confessing their sins before Jesus on the cross, before the eagle image of Pukong. The young Etonians fairly shouted with laughter. While still wailing, the penitents rose to their feet, stripped off their upper garments, and with knotted whips began to beat themselves. Blow after blow redoubled the laughter, drowned even the amplified record of their groans. Got it, Rock likes pathetic characters. I don't really like him because he's pathetic. I just think it's funny that the protagonist I'd say, yeah, kind of, maybe he's the protagonist, but yeah, the protagonist being a pathetic little lout is kind of fun. Let's see, redoubled. But why do they laugh? Asked the savage in a pained bewilderness. Why? The provost turned towards him a still broadly grinning face. Why? Because it's so extraordinarily funny. In the cinematographic twilight, Bernard risked a gesture which, in the past, even total darkness would hardly have emboldened to make. Strong in his new importance, he put his arm around the headmistress's waist. It yielded willowily. He was just about to snatch a kiss or two and perhaps a gentle pinch when the shutters clicked open again. Perhaps we had better go on, said Miss Keat, and moved towards the door. And this, said the provost a moment later, is Hypnopedic Control Room. Hundreds of synthetic music boxes, one for each dormitory, stood ranged in shelves round 3 sides of the room. Pigeonholed on the 4th were the paper soundtrack rolls on which the various hypnopedic lessons were printed. You slip the roll in here, explained Bernard, interrupting Dr. Gaffney. Press down this switch. No, not that one, corrected the provost, annoyed. That one, then. The roll unwinds. The selenium cells transform the light impulses into sound waves. And there you are, Dr. Gaffney concluded. Do they read Shakespeare? Asked the savage as they walked on their way to the biochemical laboratories, past the school library. Certainly not, said the headmistress, blushing. Our library, said Dr. Gaffney, contains only books of reference. If our young people need distraction, they can get it at the Feelies. We don't encourage them to indulge in any solitary amusements. 5 busloads of boys and girls, singing or in a silent embracement, rolled past them over the vitrified highway. Just returned, explained Dr. Gaffney, while Bernard, whispering, made an appointment with the headmistress for that very evening. From the Slough crematorium, death conditioning begins at 18 months. Every tot spends 2 mornings a week in a hospital for the dying. All the best toys are kept there, and they get chocolate cream on death days. They learn to take dying as a matter of course. Like any other physiological process, put in the headmistress professionally. Like any other physiological process, put in the headmistress professionally. 8 o'clock at the Savoy. It was all arranged. On their way back to London, they stopped at the Television Corporation's factory at Brentford. Do you mind waiting here for a moment while I go and telephone? Asked Bernard. The savage waited and watched. The main day shift was just going off duty. Crowds of lower caste workers were queued up in front of the monorail station. 700 or 800 Gamma, Delta, and Epsilon, men and women, with not more than a dozen faces and statures between them. To each of them, with his or her ticket. The booking clerk pushed over a little cardboard pillbox. The long caterpillar of men and women moved slowly forward. What's in those? Remembering the Merchant of Venice. Those caskets. The savage inquired when Bernard had rejoined them. The day's summer ration, Bernard answered, rather indistinctly, for he was masticating a piece of Benito Hoover's chewing gum. They get it after their work's over. 4 half-gram tablets, 6 on Saturdays. He took John's arm affectionately, and they walked back towards the helicopter. Lenina came singing into the changing room. You seem so very pleased with yourself, said Fanny. I am pleased, she answered. Zip. Bernard rang up half an hour ago. Zip, zip. She stepped out of her shorts. He has an unexpected engagement. Zip. Asked me if I'd take the savage to the Feelies this evening. I must fly. She hurried away towards the bathroom. She's a lucky girl, Fanny said to herself as she watched Lenina go. There was no envy in the comment. Good-natured Fanny was merely stating a fact. Lenina was lucky. Lucky in having shared with Bernard a generous portion of the savage's immense celebrity. Lucky in reflecting from her insignificant person the moment's supremely fashionable glory. Had not the secretary of the Young Women's Fortean Association asked her to give a lecture about her experiences? Had she not been invited to the annual dinner of the Aphroditeum Club? Had she not already appeared in the Feelytone news? Visibly, audibly, and tactually appeared to countless millions all over the planet? Good-natured Fanny. Sorry, I'm childish. And then you just got to remember that this book's set in England, and what they use the word Fanny for. Hardly less flattering had been the attentions paid by her conspicuous individuals. The resident world controller's second secretary had asked her to dinner and breakfast. She had spent 1 week with the Ford Chief Justice, and another with the arch community songster of Canterbury. The president of the Internal and External Secretions Corporation was perpetually on the phone, and she had been to Deauville with Deputy Governor of the Bank of Europe. Exactly, yeah. It's wonderful, of course, and yet in a way, she had confessed to Fanny, I feel as though I was getting something as if I was getting something on false pretenses, because of course the first thing that I want to know is what it's like to make love to a savage, and I have to say I don't know. Oh, Thanks for the hydrate, Stephanie. She shook her head. Most of the men don't believe me, of course, but it's true. I wish it weren't, she added sadly and sighed. He's terribly good-looking, don't you think so? But doesn't he like you? Asked Fanny. Sometimes I think he does, and sometimes I think he doesn't. He always does his best to avoid me, goes out of the room when I come in, won't touch me, won't even look at me. But sometimes if I turn round suddenly, I catch him staring. And then, well, you know how men look when they like you. Yes, Fanny knew well. I can't make it out, said Lenina. She couldn't make it out, and not only was bewildered, was also rather upset. Because you see, Fanny, I like him. Liked him more and more. Well, now there'd be a real chance, she thought, as she scented herself with her bath. Dab, dab, dab. A real chance. Her high spirits overflowed in song. Hug me till you drug me, honey. Kiss me till I'm in a coma. Hug me, honey, snuggly bunny. Love's as good as Soma. The secret organ was playing a delightfully refreshing herbal capriccio, rippling arpeggios of thyme and lavender, of rosemary, basil, myrtle, tarragon, a series of daring modulations through the spice keys into ambergris, and a slow return through sandalwood, camphor, cedar, and new-mown hay, with occasional subtle touches of discord, a whiff of kidney pudding, the faintest suspicion of pig's dung, back to the simple aromatics with which the piece began. The final blast of time died away. There was a round of applause. The lights went up. In the synthetic music machine, the soundtrack roll began to unwind. It was a trio for hyperviolin, supercello, and oboe surrogate that now filled the air with its agreeable languor. 30 or 40 bars. And then, again, this instrumental background, a much more than human voice began to warble, now throaty, now from the head, now hollow as a flute, now changed with yearning harmonics. It effortlessly passed from Gaspard Forster's low record on the very frontiers of musical tone to a trilled bat note high above the highest C to which, in 1770, at Ducal Opera of Parma, and to the astonishment of Mozart, Lucrezia Agiugari, alone of all the singers in history, once piercingly gave utterance. Sunk in their pneumatic stalls, Lenina and the savage sniffed and listened. It was now the turn also for eyes and skin. The house lights went down. Fiery letters stood out solid as though self-supported in the darkness. 3 weeks in a helicopter, and all super-singing, synthetic talking, colored stereoscopic feely, with synchronized scent organ accompaniment. Take hold of those metal knobs on the arms of your chair, whispered Lenina. Otherwise you won't get any of the feely effects. The savage did as he was told. Those fiery letters, meanwhile, had disappeared. There were 10 seconds of complete darkness, then suddenly, dazzling and incomparably more solid-looking than they would have seemed in actual flesh and blood, far more real than reality, there stood the stereoscopic images, locked in one another's arms, of a gigantic Negro and a golden-haired young brachycephalic beta-plus female. The savage started. That sensation on his lips. He lifted a hand to his mouth. The titillation ceased, let his hand fall back on the metal knob. It began again. The scent organ, meanwhile, breathed pure musk. Expiringly, a soundtrack superdove cooed. Ooh, ooh, and vibrating only 32 times a second, a deeper-than-African bass made answer, ah, ooh, ah, ooh, ah. The stereoscopic lips came together again, and once more the facial erogenous zones of the 6,000 spectators in the Alhambra tingled with the almost intolerable galvanic pleasure. Ooh. The plot of the film was extremely simple. A few minutes after the first oohs and ahs, a duet having been sung and a little love made on that famous bearskin, every hair of which, the assistant predestinator was perfectly right, could be separately and distinctively felt. The Negro had a helicopter accident, fell on his head, thump. What a twinge through the forehead. A chorus of ows and ayes went up from the audience. Concussion knocked all the Negro's conditioning into a cocked hat. He developed for the beta blonde an exclusive and maniacal passion. She protested. He persisted. There were struggles, pursuits, an assault on arrival, finally, and sensational kidnapping. The beta blonde was ravished away into the sky and kept there, hovering for 3 weeks in a wildly antisocial tete-a-tete with the black madman. Finally, after a whole series of adventures and much aerial acrobacy, 3 handsome young alphas succeeded in rescuing her. The Negro was packed off to an adult reconditioning center, and the film ended happily and decorously, with Beta Blonde becoming the mistress of all 3 rescuers. They interrupted themselves for a moment to sing a synthetic quartet with full super orchestral accompaniment and gardenias on the scent organ. Then the bearskin made a final appearance, and amidst a blare of saxophones, the last stereoscopic kiss faded into darkness. The last electric titillation died on the lips like a dying moth that quivers ever more feebly, ever more faintly, and at last is quite still. But for the Lanina, the moth did not completely die, even after the lights had gone up. While they were shuffling slowly along with the crowd towards the lift, its ghost still fluttered against her lips, still traced fine shuddering roads of anxiety and pleasure across her skin. Her cheeks were flushed. She caught hold of the savage's arms and pressed it, limp, against her side. He looked down at her for a moment, pale, pained, desiring, and ashamed of his desire. He was not worthy. Not. Their eyes for a moment met. What treasures hers promised. A queen's ransom of temperament. Hastily he looked away, disengaged his imprisoned arm. He was obscurely terrified lest she should cease to be something he could feel himself unworthy of. "I don't think you ought to see things like that," he said, making haste to transfer from Lenina herself to the surrounding circumstances the blame for any past or possible future lapse from perfection. "Things like what, John?" "Like this horrible film." "Horrible?" Lenina was genuinely astonished. "But I thought it was lovely." "It was base," he said indignantly. "It was ignoble." She shook her head. "I don't know what you mean. Why was he so queer? Why did he go out of his way to spoil things?" In the taxicopter, he hardly even looked at her, bound by strong vows that had never been pronounced, obedient to laws that had long since ceased to run. He sat averted and in silence. Sometimes, as though a finger had plucked at some taut, almost breaking string, his whole body would shake with a sudden nervous start. The taxicopter landed on the roof of Lenina's apartment house. At last, she thought, exultantly as she stepped out of the cab. At last, even though he had been so queer just now. Standing under a lamp, she peered into her hand mirror. At last. Yes, her nose was a bit shiny. She shook the loose powder from her puff while she was paying off the taxi. There would just be time. She rubbed at the shininess, thinking, he's terribly good-looking. No need for him to be shy like Bernard, and yet any other man would have done it long ago. Well, now at last. That fragment of a face in the little round mirror suddenly smiled at her. "Good night," said a strangled voice behind her. Lenina wheeled round. He was standing in the doorway of the cab, his eyes fixed, staring. Had evidently been staring all this time while she was powdering her nose, waiting. But what for? Or hesitating, trying to make up his mind, and all the time thinking. She could not imagine what extraordinary thoughts. "Good night, Lenina," he repeated, and made a strange, grimacing attempt to smile. "But, John, I thought you were, aren't you?" He shut the door and bent forward to say something to the driver. The cab shot up into the air. Looking down through the window in the floor, the savage could see Lenina's upturned face, pale in the bluish light of the lamps. The mouth was open. She was calling. Her foreshortened figure rushed away from him. The diminishing square of the roof seemed to be falling through the darkness. 5 minutes later, he was back in his room. From his hiding place, he took out his mouse-nibbled volume, turned with religious care its stained and crumbled pages, and began to read Othello. Othello, he remembered, was like the hero of 3 Weeks in a Helicopter, a black man. Drying her eyes, Lenina walked across the roof to the lift. On her way down to the 27th floor, she pulled out her Soma bottle. 1 gram, she decided, would not be enough. Hers had been more than a 1 gram affliction, but if she took 2 grams, she ran the risk of not waking up in time tomorrow morning. She compromised, and into her cupped left palm shook out 3 half-gram tablets. Just want to say thank you to anybody who's out there still listening. It's been a pretty good morning reading so far. I'm going to keep going until we get to the 3/4 mark of the book. And then I'm going to take a few minutes and we'll transfer over to Hotline Miami, which is the game that I pulled when I rolled my every game that's in my library wheel. So I'll have to look forward to that later this afternoon. Chapter 12. Bernard had to shout through the locked door. The savage would not open. But everyone's there, waiting for you. Let them wait, came back the muffled voice through the door. But you know quite well, John, how difficult it is to sound persuasive at the top of one's voice. I asked them on purpose to meet you. You ought to have asked me first whether I wanted to meet them. But you always came before, John. That's precisely why I don't want to come again. Just to please me, Bernard bellowingly wheedled. Won't you come to please me? No. Do you seriously mean it? Yes. Despairingly. But what shall I do? Bernard wailed. Go to hell, bawled the exasperated voice from within. But the arch-community songster of Canterbury is there tonight. Bernard was almost in tears. Also, at this rate, you can't get rid of me, so I'm always hanging out in here, reading rock. Oh yeah, absolutely, Steph. That's great. I'm glad to have you here. Welcome in, Snow. Been reading for about an hour, so we're 4 chapters in from where we started today. Thanks for joining us, Snow. Takwa was the only Inzuni that the savage could adequately express what he felt about the arch-community songster. Hani, he added as an afterthought, and then, with that derisive ferocity, Son zeso tsena, and he spat on the ground as Pope might have done. In the end, Bernard had to slink back, diminished, to his rooms and inform the impatient assembly that the savage would not be appearing that evening. Oh, I see. Hi, Snow. Can you start over? Can you start over now that I'm here? No, Snow, you can watch the VOD. But seriously, thanks for coming. It's always good to see you, Snow. The news was received with indignation. The men were furious at having been tricked into behaving politely to this insignificant fellow with the unsavory reputation and the heretical opinions. The higher their position in the hierarchy, the deeper their resentment. To place such a joke on me, the arch-songster kept repeating, on me. As for the women, they indignantly felt that they had been had on false pretenses, had by a wretched little man who had alcohol poured into his bottle by mistake, by a creature with a gamma-minus physique. It was an outrage, and they said so, more and more loudly. The headmistress of Eton was particularly scathing. Lenina alone said nothing. Pale, her blue eyes clouded with an unwanted melancholy. She sat in a corner, cut off from those who surrounded her by an emotion which they did not share. She had come to the party filled with a strange feeling of anxious exultation. In a few minutes, she had said to herself as she entered the room, I shall be seeing him, talking to him, telling him, for she had come with her mind made up, that I like him more than anybody I've ever known. And then perhaps he'll say... What would he say? The blood had rushed to her cheeks. Why was he so strange the other night, after the Feelies, so queer, and that I'm absolutely sure he really does rather like me. I'm sure. It was at this moment that Bernard had made his announcement. The savage wasn't coming to the party. Lenina suddenly felt all the sensations normally experienced at the beginning of a violent passion surrogate treatment. A sense of dreadful emptiness, a breathless apprehension, a nausea. Her heart seemed to stop beating. Perhaps it's because he doesn't like me, she said to herself. And at once this possibility became an established certainty. John had refused to come to her because he didn't like her. He didn't like her. It really is a bit too thick, the headmistress of Eton was saying to the director of crematoria and phosphorus reclamation, when I think that I actually... Yes, came the voice of Fanny Crown. That's definitely not Fanny. Yes, came the voice of Fanny Crown. It's absolutely true about the alcohol. Someone I know knew someone who was working in the embryo store at the time. She said so to my friend, and my friend said to me. Too bad, said Henry Foster, sympathizing with the Arch Community songster. It may interest you to know that our ex-director was on the point of transferring him to Iceland. Pierced by every word that was spoken, the tight balloons of Bernard's happy self-confidence was leaking from 1,000 wounds. Pale, distraught, abject, and agitated, he moved among his guests, stammering incoherent apologies, assuring them that the next time the savage would certainly be there, begging them to sit down and take a carotene sandwich, a slice of vitamin A pâté, a glass of champagne surrogate. They duly ate but ignored him, drank and were either rude to his face or talked to one another about him, loudly and offensively, as though he had not been there. And now, my friends, said the Arch Community songster of Canterbury, in that beautiful ringing voice with which he led the proceedings at Ford's Day celebrations. Now, my friends, I think perhaps the time has come. He rose, put down his glass, brushed from his purple viscose waistcoat the crumbs of a considerable collation, and walked towards the door. Bernard darted forward to intercept him. Let's see, add 30 seconds. All caught up on teams. Oh no. What's happened to Mr. Gingerbread Snow? What have you done to him? That's a diabolical emote. That's fucking crazy. All right, ad's starting in a second, so I will be back in 3 minutes. Corfa, bye, Rock. Okay, I'm gonna, be right back. And we are back from break. At least that's what Twitch is telling me, so I'm going to go with it. Bernard darted forward to intercept him. Must you really, Arch-Songster? It's very early still. I hoped you would. Yes. What hadn't he hoped when Lenina confidently told him that Arch-Community Songster would accept an invitation if it were sent? He's really rather sweet, you know. And she had shown Bernard the little golden zipper fastening in the form of a T, which the Arch-Songster had given her as a memento of the weekend she had spent at Lambeth. To meet the Arch-Community Songster of Canterbury and Mr. Savage, Bernard had claimed his triumph on every invitation card. But Savage had chosen this evening of all evenings to lock himself up in his room, to shout Hani, and even was lucky that Bernard didn't understand Zuni, Son Zeso Tsena. What should have been the crowning moment of Bernard's whole career had turned out to be the moment of his greatest humiliation. I'd so much hoped, he stammeringly repeated, looking up at the great dignitary with pleading and distracted eyes. Welcome back, Snow. I do love that new jelly emote. It's so good. God, I can't even deal with Bernard. Yeah, Bernard is a sniveling little shit. I'd so much hoped, he stammeringly repeated, looking up at the great dignitary with pleading and distracted eyes. My young friend, said the Arch-Community Songster in a tone of loud and solemn severity. There was a general silence. Let me give you a word of advice. He wagged his finger at Bernard. Before it's too late, a word of good advice. His voice became sepulchral. Mend your ways, my young friend, mend your ways. He made the sign of the T over him and turned away. Lenina, my dear, he called in another tone, come with me. Welcome in, kitty cat. Lou. Obediently but unsmiling and wholly insensible of the honor done to her, without elation, Lenina walked after him out of the room. The other guests followed at a respectful interval. The last of them slammed the door. Bernard was all alone. Thanks for coming in. I take it you're someone from Steph's chat, maybe, Katie's your best friend, IRL. Oh, cool. Nice. Well, welcome in. Any friend of Steph's, friend of mine, too. So, welcome in. Hope you enjoy the show. Punctured, utterly deflated, he dropped into a chair and, covering his face with his hands, began to weep. A few minutes later, however, he thought better of it and took 4 tablets of soma. Upstairs in his room, the Savage was reading Romeo and Juliet. Lenina and the Arch-Community Songster stepped out onto the roof of Lambeth Palace. Hurry up, my young friend. I mean, Lenina, called the Arch-Songster impatiently from the lift gates. Lenina, who had lingered for a moment to look at the moon, dropped her eyes and came hurryingly across the roof to rejoin him. A New Theory of Biology was the title of the paper which Mustafa Mond had just finished reading. He sat for some time, meditatively frowning, then picked up his pen and wrote across the title page. The author's mathematical treatment of the conception of purpose is novel and highly ingenious, but heretical, and so far as the present social order is concerned, dangerous and potentially subversive, not to be published. He underlined the words. The author will be kept under supervision. His transference to the Marine Biological Station of St. Helena may become necessary. A pity, he thought, as he signed his name. It was a masterly piece of work, but once you began admitting explanations in terms of purpose, well, you didn't know what the result might be. It was the sort of idea that might easily decondition the more unsettled minds among the higher castes, make them lose their faith in happiness as the sovereign good, and take to believing, instead, that the goal was somewhere beyond, somewhere outside the present human sphere, that the purpose of life was not the maintenance of well-being, but some intensification and refining of consciousness, some enlargement of knowledge, which was the controller reflected, quite possibly true. but not, in the present circumstance, admissible. He picked up his pen again, and under the words, "not to be published," drew a second line, thicker and blacker than the first, then signed. What fun it would be, he thought, if one didn't have to think about happiness. With closed eyes, his face shining with rapture, John was softly declaiming to vacancy. "Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. It seems she hangs upon the cheek of night, like a rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear, beauty too rich for use, for earth too dear." The golden tea lay shining on Lenina's bosom. Sportively, the arch community songster caught hold of it. Sportively, he pulled. "I think," said Lenina suddenly, breaking a long silence, "I'd better take a couple grams of soma." Bernard, by this time, was fast asleep and smiling at the private paradise of his dreams. Smiling. But inexorably, every 30 seconds, the minute hand of the electric clock above his head jumped forward with an almost imperceptible click. Click, 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 and it was morning. Bernard was back among the miseries of space and time. It was in the lowest spirits that he taxied across to his work at the conditioning center. The intoxication of success had evaporated. He was soberly his old self, and by contrast with the temporary balloon of these last weeks, the old self seemed unprecedentedly heavier than the surrounding atmosphere. To this deflated Bernard, the savage showed himself unexpectedly sympathetic. "You're more like what you were at Malpais," he said, when Bernard had told him his plaintive story. "Do you remember when we first talked together, outside the little house? You're like what you were then." "Because I'm unhappy again? That's why?" "Well, I'd rather be unhappy than have the sort of false, lying happiness you were having here." "I like that," said Bernard bitterly. "When it's you who were the cause of it all, refusing to come to my party and so turning them all against me." He knew that he was saying was absurd in its injustice, he admitted inwardly, and at last, even aloud, the truth of all that the savage now said about the worthlessness of friends who could be turned upon so slight a provocation into persecuting enemies. But in spite of this knowledge and these admissions, in spite of the fact that his friends' support and sympathy were now his only comfort, Bernard continued perversely to nourish, along with his quite genuine affection, a secret grievance against the savage, to meditate a campaign of small revenges to be wreaked upon him. Nourishing a grievance against the arch community songster was useless. There was no possibility of being revenged on the chief bottler or the assistant predestinator. As a victim, the savage possessed, for Bernard, this enormous superiority over the others, that he was accessible. One of the principal functions of a friend is to suffer, in a milder and symbolic form, the punishments that we should like but are unable to inflict upon our enemies. Bernard's other victim friend was Helmholtz. When, discomfited, he came and asked once more for the friendship which, in his prosperity, he had not thought it worth his while to preserve. Oof. I'll try that one again. Oh. Yeah, his old 8 centimeters shorter than everyone else. Yeah. Bernard's other victim friend was Helmholtz. When discomfited, he came and asked once more for the friendship which, in his prosperity, he had not thought it worth his while to preserve. Helmholtz gave it, and gave it without a reproach, without a comment, as though he had forgotten that there had ever been a quarrel. Touched, Bernard felt himself at the same time humiliated by his magnanimity, a magnanimity the more extraordinary and therefore the more humiliating, in that it owed nothing to Soma and everything to Helmholtz's character. It was the Helmholtz of daily life who forgot and forgave, not the Helmholtz of a half-gram holiday. Bernard was duly grateful. It was an enormous comfort to have his friend again, and also duly resentful. It would be a pleasure to take some revenge on Helmholtz for his generosity. At their first meeting after the estrangement, Bernard poured out the tale of his miseries and accepted consolation. It was not till some days later that he learned, to his surprise and with a twinge of shame, that he was not the only one who had been in trouble. Helmholtz had also come into conflict with authority. It was over some rhymes, he explained. I was giving my usual course of advanced emotional engineering for third-year students, 12 lectures, of which the 7th is about rhymes, on the use of rhymes in moral propaganda and advertisement, to be precise. I always illustrate my lecture with a lot of technical examples. This time I thought I'd give them one I'd just written myself. Pure madness, of course, but I couldn't resist it. He laughed. I was curious to see what the reactions would be. Besides, he added more gravely, I wanted to do a bit of propaganda. I was trying to engineer them into feeling as I felt when I wrote the rhymes.
Come on, move it, Rock, move it!
He laughed again. What an outcry there was. The principal had me up and threatened to hand me the immediate sack. I'm a marked man. Welcome in, Luca. Thanks for the care package. Go ahead. Stretch first. It's been a little while. Oh. Yeah, good to always have you here, Luca. Thanks for dropping by. So where was I? What were your rhymes? Bernard asked. They were about being alone. Bernard's eyebrows went up. I'll recite them to you if you like. And Helmholtz began. Yesterday's committee. Sticks but a broken drum. Midnight in the city. Flutes in a vacuum. Shut lips, sleeping faces. Every stopped machine. The dumb and littered places where crowds have been. All silences rejoice. Weep, loudly or low. Speak, but with the voice of whom I do not know. Absence says of Susans, absence of Egerias, arms in respective bosoms, lips and posteriors. Slowly perform a presence, whose, and I ask of what? So absurd in essence that something which is not, nevertheless should populate empty night more solidly than that which we copulate. Why should it seem so squalidly? I want to squish the moth. Don't squish the moth. Just shine a little light for it. Always good to have Luca around. Luca's a good bean. Gives Gollum energy. Why shouldn't I have it? Is it always good, though? Maybe. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. We'll have to leave it up to like always. I don't know about that. Yeah, you two can fight about that in the comments. Well, I gave them that as an example, and they reported me to the principal. I'm not surprised, said Bernard. It's flatly against all their sleep teaching. Remember, they've had at least 250,000 warnings about solitude. I know, but I thought I'd see what the effect would be. Well, you've seen now. Helmholtz only laughed. I feel, he said, after a silence, as though I were just beginning to have something to write about, as though I were beginning to be able to use that power I've got inside me, that extra, latent power. Something seems to be coming to me. In spite of all his troubles, he seemed, Bernard thought, profoundly happy. And everyone's eating Luca in chat now. For pleasure. Jesus Christ. Well, while you're all munching on Luca, I'll continue reading. Helmholtz and the savage took to one another at once, so cordially indeed that Bernard felt a sharp pang of jealousy. In all these weeks, he had never come so close to intimacy with... He had never come to so close an intimacy with the savage as Helmholtz immediately achieved. Did I skip a page? No. Okay. Watching them Listening to their talk, he found himself sometimes resentfully wishing that he had never brought them together. He was ashamed of his jealousy and alternately made efforts of will and took soma to keep himself from feeling it. But the efforts were not very successful, and between the soma holidays there were, of necessity, intervals. The odious sentiment kept on returning. At his third meeting with the savage, Helmholtz recited his rhymes on solitude. Luca, when I'm adding melted butter to his head. Pulling up a doc to start writing a fanfic. Uh-oh. We're getting fanfics. Hell yeah. We have to share that with Blabs. Especially since it's between Snow and Luca. Don't share it with the slime. This is definitely getting shared with the slime. What do you think of them? He asked when he had done. The savage shook his head. Listen to this, was his answer, and unlocking the drawer in which he kept his mouse-eaten book, he opened and read. Let the bird of loudest lay on the sole Arabian tree, herald sad and trumpet be. Helmholtz listened with a growing excitement. At sole Arabian tree, he started at thou shrieking harbinger, he smiled with sudden pleasure. At every fowl of tyrant wing, the blood rushed up into his cheeks, but at defunctive music, he turned pale and trembled with an unprecedented emotion. The savage read on. Property was thus appalled, that the self was not the same, single nature's double name. Neither two nor one was called. Reason in itself confounded, saw division grow together. Orgy porgy, said Bernard, interrupting the reading with a loud, unpleasant laugh. It's just a solidarity service hymn. He was revenging himself on his two friends for liking one another more than they liked him. If I'm anything, I'm a problem. I'll write an epic and ask Rob to read it. Excellent. I'll be looking forward to it. I'll be sure to highlight it so Snow can... Rock reading is simply too far. Well, would you rather me pipe it out in bits into your TTS while you're streaming, Snow? Actually, no, I would not rather that. Don't give me ideas. In the course of their next 2 or 3 meetings, he frequently repeated this little act of vengeance. It was simple, and since both Helmholtz and the savage were dreadfully pained by the shattering and defilement of a favorite poetic crystal, extremely effective. In the end, Helmholtz threatened to kick him out of the room if he dared to interrupt again, and yet, strangely enough, the next interruption, the most disgraceful of all, came from Helmholtz himself. That's it, I'm retiring from streaming. No, Snow, don't retire. Don't retire. I'm just poking fun at you. Where the hell did I leave off? Wow. The savage was reading Romeo and Juliet aloud. Reading, for all the time he was seeing himself as Romeo and Lenina as Juliet, with an intense and quivering passion. Helmholtz had listened to the scene of the lovers' first meeting with a puzzled interest. The scene in the orchard had delighted him with its poetry, but the sentiments expressed had made him smile. Guess you gotta start streaming me with me, since you'll never have to worry about viewers showing up. Don't retire. You haven't even seen me stream. It might be awful. I need more materials. Don't you average like 20 viewers per stream? Yeah, I want to say, I think Luca's got a pretty solid average. Yeah, pretty close to like 17, 18. What I usually see. I don't know if that's like, your average, but that's usually what I see. 10, 12, that's still pretty solid. Where did I leave off? I left off. Getting into such a state about having a girl, it seemed rather ridiculous, but taken detail by verbal detail, what a superb piece of emotional engineering. That old fellow, he said. He makes our best propaganda technicians look absolutely silly. The savage smiled triumphantly and resumed his reading. All went tolerably well until, in the last scene of the third act, Capulet and Lady Capulet began to bully Juliet to marry Paris. Helmholtz had been restless throughout the entire scene, but when, pathetically mimed by the savage, Juliet cried out, "Thank you for the follow, kitty cat. Always good to have new friends and friends of friends come into the stream." Oh shit, it's Bishop. Welcome in, Bishop. Thanks for stopping by. I'm gonna finish up. Probably finish up this chapter, and then I'm gonna switch over to Hotline Miami, because that's what I rolled on my Wheel of Doom a couple weeks ago. 10 to 12 doesn't make me have to wear a maid dress, so it's fine. Nice. I cried out. Is there no pity sitting in the clouds that sees into the bottom of my grief? O sweet my mother, cast me not away. Delay this marriage for a month, a week, or if you do not, make the bridal bed in that dim monument where Tybalt lies. When Juliet said this, Helmholtz broke out in an explosion of uncontrollable guffawing. The mother and father, grotesque obscenity, forcing the daughter to have someone she didn't want, and the idiotic girl not saying that she was having someone else whom, for the moment at any rate, she preferred. In its smutty absurdity, the situation was irresistibly comical. What have you done? I'm addicted now. Look, we share the same brain cells. You should have known. Good to hear that you're doing good, Bishop. Doing well. This is going to be the second book I'm going to finish in a month. I'm actually really excited to have done that, because it took me well over a month to finish Dracula. So, yeah, I'm finally getting into a groove with the reading, and, you know, now that I'm actually scheduling my streams, I hope I can keep up with it. But, I don't know, I'm feeling better about the whole thing. But yeah, kitty cat, if you're hopelessly addicted to my reading, the VODs do expire here, but then they go up on my YouTube, so that's linked in my profile as well if you want to check that out later. Let's see. He had managed with heroic effort to hold down the mounting pressure of his hilarity, but sweet mother, in the savage's tremulous tone of anguish, and the reference to Tybalt lying dead, but evidently uncremated and wasting his phosphorus on a dim monument, were too much for him. He laughed and laughed till the tears streamed down his face, quenchlessly laughed while, pale with a sense of outrage, the savage looked at him over the top of his book, and then, as the laughter still continued, closed it indignantly, got up, and with the gesture of one who removes his pearl from before swine, locked it away in its drawer. And yet, Helmholtz said when, having recovered breath enough to apologize, he had mollified the savage into listening to his explanations. I know quite well that one needs ridiculous, mad situations like that. One can't write really well without anything else. Why was that old fellow such a marvelous propaganda technician? Because he had so many insane, excruciating things to get excited about. You've got to be hurt and upset, otherwise you can't think of the really good, penetrating, X-ray-ish phrases. But fathers and mothers? He shook his head. You can't expect me to keep a straight face about fathers and mothers. And who's going to get excited about a boy having a girl or not having her? The savage winced, but Helmholtz, who was staring pensively at the floor, saw nothing. No, he concluded with a sigh. It won't do. We need some other kind of madness and violence. But what? What? Where can one find it? He was silent, then shaking his head. I don't know, he said at last. I don't know. I'm not addicted yet. I'm just a dick. You're not a dick, Snow. Someone can take that away from you. Reading into everything Snow says so I can develop his fanfic character. Excellent, Steph. I'm sure Snow will appreciate that. I know Silly will appreciate that too. That would be amazing. I'm dyslexic, so reading is hard for me. Also, your voice is helping. Thank you very much. Was that a Steel Dong joke? Yes, that was a Steel Dong joke, Kiro. I don't know why I just called you by your last name. Okay, so that is the end of chapter 12. And right there, I think, yeah, we're 72% of the book. Leaves me enough for one more episode. We'll hold there on the reading. Kiro is more of a modifier like Read and Rock.